Evening. This is Steve Ward with Docked Out. Thanks so much for joining. Excited to be with you tonight. And let's just get started. You can find me on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Search for Docked Out Official, all one word. And you can also email me, steve@dockedout.org, anytime, and I'd be happy to correspond. Click subscribe and drop a like if you will. If you enjoy the content, please help out to make sure that lots of other people can find the content and hoping to be helpful to as many people as possible. So good to see you. Last live stream, I talked about the history of anti Semitism, specifically talking about the lineage of Esau through the Edomites to the Amalekites. So check that out and hope that's helpful. So, this is kind of like a part two. But with the war in Gaza raging, I'm really hoping to help you learn how to have conversations that are constructive and beneficial to people on both sides of the argument. This is really a highly controversial topic, and I want us to be sensitive to those that we're talking to, and also have some helpful tools that'll help you in conversation with people who you might disagree with and who might disagree with you and have some very strong feelings. There are ways to navigate that. So by all means, I don't want us to look at the Palestinian people today and make any stereotypes or broad judgments about the spiritual goings on of what's happening in somebody's heart and mind. And my purpose in tracing the lineage through Esau and the Amalekites up through the modern day Palestinians, I'm not trying to suggest that spiritual issues are passed on biologically or genetically through a specific lineage only, but I'm trying to illustrate that this is a spiritual battle that we're in. And I think, given the particular history of a people group that are the descendants of Esau, there are spiritual considerations and there's a context that's very, very helpful to understand. So, my purpose here is to help you navigate these conversations and to give you some of those tools. So, check out part one, where I take a look at the history of anti Semitism from the Garden of Eden through Herod in the nation of Israel, the Roman leader. And tonight, I'll talk about how we can have conversations with people about the war in Gaza and about anti Semitism in general. And then I'll transition into just a broad sweep of history from the Roman time through the present. And let's take a look at the roots of World War I, World War II, the Crusades, all these different periods of time, and wrap that all together, leading us into what we have today, the Palestinian people, the descendants of Esau. And I think you'll find it fascinating and hopefully helpful. So, we're going to take a broad brush through history. Before we get there, let's talk a little bit more about how to have some of these difficult conversations. So, I think right off the bat, remember that we live in a post Christian culture where there's a lot of biblical illiteracy, let's call it that. I think to say that somebody is, the descendant of Esau, that's really not going to be very well understood or very well taken at all. I think we should avoid that kind of language. So I'm helping giving you this material so you have that historical context and that biblical context for what's going on. But I don't mean that we should talk that way to other people. This is for your use and benefit. But I think we need to remember that we live in a post-Christian culture, and we have to find common ground in our conversation, tease out and try to ask a lot of questions and try to get to the bottom of what people think and believe and why, and take it from there. And we can make a strong case and draw upon some of this historical information to bring out some points that I think are very, very important. So, general advice, I would say you want to, keep calm. This is a highly controversial topic, and just keep calm. Keep your head about you. Be patient with others. Be a good listener. Active listening, meaning that you reflect back what you hear a person say. Try to make sure you fully understand. You can say, I heard you explain this, or I heard you say this. Is that what you meant? Or here's what I think you mean. Can you tell me more? A lot of that type of open ended style is super helpful. So repeat and reflect back. Be as clear and concise as you possibly can be. Now, remember the post Christian context, the biblical illiteracy. Now, the end goal is to try to get people to the gospel message, right? But remember, part of evangelism is planting seeds in people's hearts, seeds of the truth. God does the work, but we're to be faithful ministers and we are to present the gospel when we have that opportunity. But at times, people are just not ready for that. And that's okay. I don't think we should be aggressive or force people down that path when they're not ready. There's a discernment of the Holy Spirit that is involved here, but planting seeds of truth into people's hearts and minds is a very, very important part of evangelism. Someone else might come alongside later. The Holy Spirit is at work in somebody's life, and over time, God does that work. So we come along as gardeners, so to speak. We till up that soil of a person's heart. We plant those seeds of truth the best that we can when we have opportunity. And if we do that with grace, I think that will be very usable in a person's heart. So remember, the end game is always the gospel, but you might not get there, and that's okay. We can still share the truth in love. Be confident but not arrogant. Confident in the sense that we know, biblically speaking, that the truth is on our side on these issues. So we can stand with confidence of the truth of the Word of God and the biblical context. But that doesn't mean arrogance. It doesn't mean that we are condescending in any way. We're speaking the truth with love. We want to be smart. We want to have enough background information to um, understand the issue well. But we also want to use wisdom, understand that this is spiritual warfare that we are engaging in. And the people who are protesting in favor of Hamas and the Palestinian movement, the anti Israeli crowd, remember that there's deceit that is involved. We have a large number of people around the world who are under that anti Semitic deceit. And we're trying to unravel that. But remember to have compassion, be gracious to people that you're talking to, and be aware of certain common pitfalls. Relativistic language, how the culture might change the meaning of terms, such as occupied land. Well, what do you mean by occupied? Genocide. What do you mean by genocide? So there's a lot of terminology that is being used. It's so important in conversation to try to understand. Well, what exactly does the person you're talking to? What do they mean by that? So you have to ask them and reflect it back, listen actively, be kind and be patient, courteous, all of those things, but try to get to an understanding of how terms are being used. Otherwise, you might go off in a totally different direction. I think we need to understand too, some people are just not ready or willing to have any conversation at all. There's just anger, they're just yelling, they're in your face, they're not interested in anything that you have to say. Um, Part of wisdom in that context is to just pick your battles, just walk away. That's just not the time to engage somebody who is in that state of mind. So just remember that's okay. We're not trying to be forceful with people who are just not willing or interested to engage in conversation. Here are some general guidelines that I'd like to give you in a little bit more detail. Always be super friendly. And what helps build a rapport is to ask the other person's name. Hey, I'm Mike, I'm Joe, I'm Barb. Just be super friendly and ask the person's name and then use their name. that draws people in and helps show them that you're truly interested in them and their view, how they think and feel and why. And that is going to really go a long way. Focus on questions. Again, also showing that you're interested in the individual. Gather information by asking tons of questions rather than coming across as you're lecturing, you're saying, "You're wrong. Here's why," and you just boom, boom, boom. Here's the list of all the things that you want to say. You don't want to have an agenda like that. Come at these conversations by asking lots of questions and help understand where a person is coming from, and then listen critically for those doors of opportunity where you can then reflect back and try to get more understanding and direct the conversation in a more constructive manner where you can help reveal maybe some errors in thinking, some false assumptions, whatever the case might be given the situation. So focus on the issue, try to avoid rabbit trails. And here are some examples of questions. You can say something like, well, what do you mean by that? Or tell me more, or exactly, where are you coming from with this? What do you mean? Tell me more. You're trying to open that door of conversation. Let the other person lead and tell you what they're thinking and why. And if they say something that is, controversial or sounds, incorrect, or maybe there's a lot of, assumptions or presuppositions all mixed together, it feels kind of garbled, and, you want to just start pointing out certain things. I would recommend hold off on that and just listen and use the tool of questioning. Ask more questions. Well, why do you think that way? Or how did you come to that conclusion? Why do you have that particular view? What led you to that conclusion? Okay, so these are open ended questions that draw out more information from that person. And that information is going to really help you quite a bit as the conversation evolves. As the person is explaining where he or she is coming from, you're listening to some of the flaws, maybe in reasoning or in logic or historical context or whatever the case might be. You're listening and you're making a mental note. Ask questions that might help expose some of the things and then just see where that goes. So here's a little bit more example. So let's say you're engaging in a conversation, uh, somebody who is in supportive of the war in Gaza on the side of Hamas, that this is a resistance movement. They say, join the resistance, or this is Palestinian resistance of the occupier, some type of language, something like that. So, you can just ask questions. Well, what do you mean by occupier? Or tell me more about what do you mean by occupation? Who is the occupier? What do you mean? How did you come to that understanding? Tell me more about, the reason why you think like that. You can talk about, if somebody talks about the peace process, let's have ceasefire now. You can ask questions and, well, what would that mean? A ceasefire in what way? On the side of Hamas, on the side of Israel, advocating for an all-out ceasefire or a truce or a cessation to the war, and then what? Get the person to talk a little bit more about what that would look like, and to try to articulate exactly how this piece would look. And then you can always, just listen to what they say, and then you can work in some of the historical context about the peace efforts in the past, the different treaties and the ways that the Israelis have tried to negotiate for peace with a two-state solution in the past. Why do you think it would be different or more effective now? Or how can we go about this a different way? What would that look like? What does peace mean in your mind? And peace for whom? And that's kind of a thing is what I'm really trying to get after here. The same thing, talking about humanitarian aid coming into Gaza. People will say we need to let aid in. Well, you can just reflect back and say, well, we've tried. Aid has been given in large dollars, and what's happened to that money. See what they say, and draw out more information in that area. Same, you can use the same technique talking about civilians as human shields, for example. Some of the other controversial things, the statements of "for the river to the sea." Well, what do you mean by that? And which river? And where would the Jews go? Um, so that sort of a thing is really what I'm trying to say. Lots of questions will help you very much. Stay calm, stay collected, be kind and courteous, and reflect back. We'll talk a little bit more about the conversations that we can have. For now, let's shift gears a little bit. I want to give you a brief overview of where we were last time. So, taking a look at anti-Semitism, it's really taking form today in this relationship between Muslims and Jews. The Temple Mount is highly controversial, for example. But I want you to remember that anti Semitism is a spiritual issue. It is a spiritual battle. It is not a military battle only. It began with Satan in the Garden of Eden. It says in Genesis chapter 26, "In thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed," talking about the promise to Abraham. We have this effort, this desire that Satan had to rule the earth. God creates this beautiful paradise, but then he puts Adam and Eve in charge of it. He wants to prevent the Messiah from coming, and to prevent the covenant promise that I just showed you from taking place. Satan is in charge on earth, of course, under the sovereignty of God, but Satan is in charge at least for now, will not always be forever. So, what happened? So, Jacob and Esau, the twin brothers, were not getting along. Esau despised his birthright. Later, Jacob stole the blessing. They both have a lot of cattle, goods, material things, gaining wealth. They separate. Jacob goes to Haran, gets married there. That's a story of Rachel and Leah, has children, returns back to the land later, goes into Egypt. This is the time of famine, winds up in Egypt, as opposed to Esau, who flees to Mount Seir. Mount Seir is to the southeast of Judah, the Seir Mountains, which is in modern day Jordan. Okay, Petra was the headquarters of the kingdom of Eden. And Esau had a grandson named Amalek. Now, remember the story when the Jews left Egypt. So, this is the Exodus. They encountered the Amalekites at Rephidim, and there was a big battle there. God remembered the hostility of the Amalekites to the Jews and declares here, the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. So that means continuing even to today. But whose war is this? It is the Lord's, it's not ours. Again, reinforcing the idea of spiritual battle. So as time goes on, Saul battles the Amalekites. This is at Gibeah, encountered where Samuel confronts him about the king Agag, who he lets survive. But the Amalekites were defeated, not completely, but many of them fled to Persia, that's modern day Iran, as a result of this battle. They resettled in Iran. Now, some stayed in Edom, but many wound up in modern day Iran. Keep that in the back of your mind. That's really important historically in terms of how the Edomites wound up in modern day Iran. Now, later in history, the Babylonian Empire took control, the Edomites actually helped the Babylonians defeat Judah and destroy the temple. This is in 586 BC. The Babylonian Empire was huge, but encompassed all of the nation of Israel and beyond, the known world of that time. Now, God punishes Edom for their assistance in helping the Babylonians defeat Judah and destroy the temple. So God moves the Nabateans out of Arabia, and they drive the Edomites um, out of Petra, drive them out of Edom with Petra at the headquarters to the northwest into Idumea, which is in the southern part of Judea. That was problematic for the Jews throughout their history as they moved north and occupied much of the nation of Israel as the Babylonians left. Um, and the Jews were scattered and taken into captivity. Well, later the Medes and the Persians defeat Babylon, and now the Persian Empire is in play. Now, some of the Jews stayed in Babylon, in modern day Iraq, Iran, that region. And that's how Jews and the family of Esther and Mordecai were actually there in the Mede and the Persian Empire. Now, some of the Edomites went to Israel with the Medes and located themselves there. Some Jews also went back to Jerusalem, but many stayed in Babylon simply because it was very difficult to make such a journey back to the homeland. So many had stayed. So this is, the story of Esther and Haman, who was a descendant of King Agag the Amalekite. This is Shushan, the palace, and we all know the story of Esther. Now, over time, the Greeks conquered the Medes and the Persians. Some Edomites stayed, some scattered into Greece, to Germany, to Italy, to the Eastern European countries. Those are like the Balkans and North Africa. So we have this repopulating of the Edomites throughout that part of the world at that time. Now, as the Greeks conquered the Medes and the Persians, Israel was generally speaking Hellenized, a lot of Greek influence there. But then Rome conquers Greece. But it was many of the Edomites in Italy that were actually part of the Roman Empire and part of the Roman army that came, that was part of the Roman conquests. So the Roman Empire succeeds the Greeks. Rome installs Herod, who was an Idumean, to be in charge, and we know the biblical stories from there. Now, as history goes on, and I know that this is kind of a sweeping, quick kind of overview. So the Romans destroy Jerusalem and the temple. This is in 70 AD. This is the Emperor Titus, and this was absolute, complete destruction to the point where there was literally no stone left on top of one another, just as Jesus had predicted would happen. This is complete destruction. The stones of the temple just completely obliterated, lying down. And there are historical records of the Romans doing this, pulling stones on top of one another. And this was really to try to get all the gold out of the temple area that was covering some of the stones that were involved and so forth. So Titus parades some of the captives through Rome, and he took loot from the temple, including the menorah, the table of showbread, and paraded this through the city, as well as with some of the captives. So, what happened to the Jews from there? Well, this is the diaspora, as we say. So, the Jews were scattered at that point after the destruction by Rome all throughout the known world at that time. So, we have North Africa, Middle East, Europe, and partly further to the east to Babylon as well. There were wars. The Zealots and the Idumeans had some clashes with Rome, but ultimately Rome was victorious. And this is commemorated. This is the Arch of Titus that you can go see today, commemorating these events and this Roman victory over the Jews. There's nothing left except the Western Wall, where you can go and visit today. People can pray and lay hands on the wall and leave notes. These are prayers of pilgrims who go to the Western Wall. But otherwise, there is no temple on the Temple Mount to this day. It was the Romans in 117 AD. This was the Emperor Hadrian who declared the nation of Israel, that geographic territory that I have circled here in yellow. It was renamed in the year 135 Syria Palestina. Okay, and this is the first time the word Palestine is ever used in reference to this geographical area. It was never its own individual nation. This is a term that was used to describe this geographic region of the Roman Empire. Okay, it was never its own nation, but the term has persisted, and we call it Palestine today. So, what happened to the Idumeans as the Romans took over? Well, some stayed in Jerusalem, some went back to Idumea. But notably, this is really important. Some actually went to the Balkans. So, this is Bosnia Herzegovina. Um, and you can see the surrounding Balkan states. So there was a resettlement there too, mostly to modern day Bosnia by the Idumeans, who are the descendants of Esau. They lived there and remained there up until and through modern times. All right, moving on. So in 330 AD, Rome falls. Rome splits into a Western Empire and an Eastern Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, which is also called the Byzantine Empire. The capital was relocated from Rome to the ancient city of Byzantium, which is our modern day Istanbul. But Rome renamed it to Constantinople. Okay, so the Idumeans remained in Syria, Palestina. There was intermarriages with Arabs and Jews and so forth. There was this renaming of Byzantium to Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire, which was basically the Roman Empire, came to power and lasted for many years. So this was in the 300s. Well, what happened in the 500s? And this is so important. So Muhammad was born in 570 AD. Islam subsequently expands out of Saudi Arabia, where it originated, to other parts of the Middle East, North Africa, Spain, that you see here in green. The Muslims took over Jerusalem in 638. And because of Muslim continued expansion and aggression, this was part of what led to the Crusades. So the Crusades are now raging during this time period, all the way up through about the early 1400s, the 1440s or so. And what happens from there? So the Ottoman Empire is now in power in this region of the nation of Israel and beyond that you can see here on the map. So the Ottoman Empire is now in power, headquartered out of Turkey, Constantinople, Istanbul, which is modern day Turkey. Okay, so this is the Caliphate, the Ottoman Empire. So the former nation of Israel is absorbed as part of the Ottoman Empire. So this is in the 1440 to 1450 time period. The Ottomans controlled the Middle East. And why is that important? Because the Bosphorus Straits, this little narrow body of water, connects Turkey to Europe. So basically, the Middle East and Europe are connected by this tiny bit of water here, which today is an area of major commercial, commerce and whatnot, but it's strategically very, very important. So the Ottomans here are in control. These are pictures of mosques in Constantinople, modern day Istanbul. So time moves on. So there was a famine in the 1500s. So some of the Edomites who had remained in the geographic region of the former Israel, some stayed, some fled to Iran to the east. But we have this scattering of peoples through the known world at that time. But we're in the 1500s, late 1400s, and so getting into more of the modern times, the Reformation, Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution, scientific revolutions, and so forth is all, on the horizon. But what I want to point out to you is that anti-Semitism was very, very much alive and well, taking form and manifested through the Islamic influence. So in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but in 1492, the Jews were also expelled out of Spain. Or this was a huge, anti-Semitic incident where they are kicked out of Spain. In the 1800s through the early 1900s, the Jews were expelled from many parts of North Africa and the Middle East. Almost a million were driven out by the Muslims from their homes in the Middle East and Africa. And in the 1880s, there was a similar type of a pogrom or kicking the Jews out. This is Russia. So between the late 1400s through the late 1800s, over that 400 year period of time, there's massive and rampant anti-Semitism throughout Europe, North Africa, the Middle East. So where do people go? Well, many went back to their homeland in Israel, where they were not exactly met with open arms. Now, remember, all the way back when the Babylonians destroyed the temple in 586 BC, the Jews were taken into captivity. Some had later returned. So, we're aware of some of those stories. The Idumeans had moved out of Edom to southern Judah, migrated north, had taken over and occupied much of that land, and have remained there, ever since. So that is really the original source of occupation of Israel, goes all the way back as a consequence of the Babylonian captivity and how the Idumeans, the descendants of Esau, had taken advantage of that scenario. All right, so fast forward again back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. So what happened? So World War I breaks out. The Allies are victorious. World War I ends. The Allies defeat the Ottoman Empire. So General Allenby, British general, has a very key role to play here because Jerusalem has been under Muslim rule since 637. The British are here, but the British do not want to colonize the Middle East. Okay, so here's a picture of General Allenby coming in to Jerusalem. What does he do? He doesn't want to remain in control. He doesn't want it to become a colony of Great Britain. So General Allenby hands over the mayorship of Jerusalem to Hussein al-Husseini. And here's a picture of this gentleman. So he accepts or surrenders to the British. There's a picture of him with some troops. So Hussein al-Husseini, this is an important figure. Anti-Semitic, was really wanting to prevent land sales to the Jews who were fleeing out of Europe, other parts of the Middle East and North Africa as a part of the pogroms. But he did not want the Jews to be back in the land. So he traces his lineage back to Ali, who was a direct heir of Muhammad. So there's this Edomite and Arabian intermarriage. The area had been Islamified at this point, and he was very instrumental in leading riots against the British and against the Jews, both before and after World War I. So not exactly a friendly character, but he was given the mayorship of Jerusalem by General Allenby as the British were victorious in World War I. So Why is that important? Okay, so there's more about the lineage of this particular individual. So Hussein al Husseini had a nephew whose name was Amin al Husseini. So here's a picture of him with German troops. So now we're getting into the World War II time frame. So this is the nephew of Hussein al Husseini, and he was the grand mufti, or basically the leading Muslim cleric in Jerusalem. He continued the idea of opposing any consideration of Jewish settlement back in the Holy Land. But what happened? So Amin was invited to Berlin by Hitler. Here's a picture of them meeting together, where Hitler is asking for support for the final solution from Amin al Husseini. Why would he do that? Because of the vicious anti Semitism that was characterized in this particular individual, in this particular lineage. Again, descendants of Esau, the Amalekites, modern day Palestinian leaders who were anti-Semitic and participated in the atrocities of the Holocaust. Here's a picture of Amin al-Husseini inspecting the troops, and here is a picture of him at one of the concentration camps in World War II, approving of the goings on there at the camp. Hitler convinces him to make some propaganda radio broadcasts. And here's a quote. This is March 1944. "Kill the Jews wherever you find them, for the love of Allah, of history and religion." Okay, this was spoken by Amin al-Husseini, who was the Mufti of Jerusalem, on Radio Berlin, broadcast throughout Europe and really all of the world. This was a call to all Muslims to rise up and kill the Jews. And here's a picture of Amin al-Husseini working with the SS troops, who, guess where they were from? Bosnia. And remember how the Edomites, the Idumeans, had fled to Bosnia and the Balkans after the Roman Empire had taken over and they were scattered. They went to the Balkans, notably Bosnia. So there was a contingent of descendants of Esau there in Bosnia. Amin al-Husseini knew this and understood that they would want to participate on the front lines as SS troops to assist in the extermination of the Jews. So here he is. He went to Bosnia to get them, to recruit them, to train, to bring them into the German army, where they were on the forefront of some major battles, and were certainly fully supportive of the final solution. So what happens after World War II? Well, the Husseini family fled into modern day Jordan. So remember, so now we have a lineage in Iran, Iraq, Jordan. Mount Seir and Petra originally was in modern day Jordan, but now we have this additional link to modern day Iran and Jordan. And in 1948, the nation of Israel was reestablished. Now, the goal was to reintegrate the Arabs and Jews, to let them live side by side. But as you all know, the peace processes, the peace efforts fell apart many times, despite Israel's intention to establish peace and to live side by side with the Arabs. So what happened? So in 1948, we have the first Arab-Israeli war. Now, this is so key. So the Arabs were told, the Arabs who were living in Israel at the time, 1948, they were told by the leadership of the surrounding Islamic countries, notably Jordan, to leave Israel, thinking that Israel would soon and very quickly be defeated in this war. So bringing the Arabs out, setting them up in refugee camps, calling them Palestinian refugees. That's how that term originated. So here's the first use of that phrase, Palestinian refugees. The Jews did not kick them out. Okay, they were told to leave. So they left, and they have been kept in refugee camps um, as a propaganda tool, really, calling them Palestinian refugees. But just understand that it was not the Jews who forced them out. They were told to leave. And this has been really a public relations tool that the Palestinians have used. So Jordan takes the West Bank, which is biblical Judea and Samaria. 1967, Israel retakes the West Bank. They also take Gaza, that had been previously under Egyptian control. But in 94, Israel offered to give the West Bank to the Palestinian Authority. So that was Yasser Arafat. Guess who Yasser Arafat is? He is the nephew of Amin al Husseini. Okay, Yasser Arafat is his nephew, continuing in the footsteps of anti-Semitism. So Yasser Arafat was pivotal in the Palestinian Authority as well as in Fatah, another similar organization with similar goals. In 2000, Israel offered the Palestinian Authority Gaza and East Jerusalem in an effort to establish a two-state solution, and Yasser Arafat said no, indicating that there's no interest in two states. The goal is complete annihilation and extermination of the Jews. 2004, Yasser Arafat dies. 2008, Mahmoud Abbas takes over the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, and Fatah, and he swears to continue Arafat's policy, not interested in a two-state solution, dragging along the peace negotiations, but it's really going nowhere. Now, I want to leave you with this thought. In the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, so it's a small book. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen, as thou hast done, speaking to the Edomites, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. Verse 16, for as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yeah, they shall drink and they shall swallow down and they shall be as though they had not been. And in verse 18, the house of Esau for stubble, there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord hath spoken it. Harsh words by the Lord towards the lineage of Esau, the Edomites, who are still among us today and the Palestinian people. Now, of course, there's complex intermarriage between the Arabs, the surrounding countries and nations. So I understand, this was a sweeping overview, a lot of nuances. That was a huge swath of time in history to just make some blanket statements. So I get that. But just understand that future events as they unfold will not be in the favor of the Palestinian people as the Ezekiel 38 war unfolds, as the nations of the world gather against the nation of Israel. Israel will not be able to survive and be victorious. It's the Lord, it's the return of Christ that will bring ultimate victory to his chosen people. Now, we know that biblically, but we live in a biblically illiterate culture and a post-Christian, postmodern culture. So what do we do? So let's get back to where we started. How do we have these conversations? So I gave historical context here to help you understand where we've been, but please don't call people Amalekites or Idumeans or Edomites. That kind of language will be inflammatory and is really not helpful. That wasn't my purpose. My purpose was to help you understand the historical context of people groups and how anti-Semitism has always been among us. And we're not going to fix it because it's a spiritual matter. Christ will support his people and will lead them to victory in his timing. And that's not for us to know. But use this information to help people understand that the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, were chosen to bring the Messiah to earth. And the Abrahamic covenant, where all nations will be blessed, that includes the Palestinians. All nations includes all of the people of the lineage of Esau and Ishmael and everybody else. So by no means do we suggest that salvation is only for certain people groups and not others. In fact, there are remarkable stories coming out of Gaza right now about the gospel message going forth and the church growing all through the Middle East. It's really incredible. So don't fall into that trap, but just understand that uh, the Muslim people ultimately will be defeated at the second coming of Christ. There's going to be wars and rumors of wars up until that point. So, what do? We love them. We share the gospel. We plant seeds of truth. We engage the culture. We engage conversations. We move the needle on what's happening with people spiritually because we care about their spiritual well being. That's the point. So, take it for what it's worth. I want you to understand the context and where things are headed, certainly, but let that motivate us to love others more with more compassion, understanding that we need the Lord. And the Palestinian people are certainly no different, and they deserve the truth and they need the truth. And it's our job as the church to show them the compassion of Christ, to speak the truth in love with grace, seasoned in such a way that we get people to the place of understanding that maybe there's been some misunderstandings of the historical context here that we can help people with a little bit. Maybe that would matter for some, others less so. But as we take a look at the political and military situation around the world, um, we know that ultimately we cannot eradicate anti Semitism. We might be able to defeat Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, but anti Semitism will always be among us because it's a spiritual issue. And it's Christ who will ultimately be victorious in this area. So I hope this has been helpful as an overview and to give a little bit of some guidance and suggestions on how we can engage people in these tough times. So look forward to our next time together, and I'll see you then. Take care. Bye bye.